Maybe I could just leave and come up to the festival with you. Get on the lash for 2 days.
That's it. Oh, you can meet me in Fonny at I think we're getting the 6:30 train. So
6:30 tonight.
It's
going to be great.
Soz love, Soz mum and dad. How long if you ditched your kids and your wife and your parents this weekend on a whim? How long do you think it would take you to pull that one back? Was that a sort of relationship breakup thing, or was that
if I just legged it without saying?
You said, I need to spend some time.
I need to spend time on my own in Edinburgh.
No, you got to go read it. No excuses. You just got to go.
That's months. Months of eating humble pie in the doghouse and sleeping in the lounge.
Yeah, it's still worth it. Here we are in CSC Champagne Bar.
Indeed, the
longest
champagne bar in Europe for the Innovation Ramble.
And do you want to confess to anyone who's listening what you did yesterday?
What, are you talking about my tweet to the Eurostar?
No, the fact that you showed up to the podcast at 7 AM and said what?
Early, actually, 5 to 7, and confessed that my research hadn't been as targeted as I'd hoped. I kind of ended up down a memory route and not so much of a learning route. AKA
hadn't done his homework.
Done the homework just in the wrong area, so kind of hash. No, I'm not going to say fail, but I didn't end up with the same at the same destination I needed to.
You're such a politician.
Bullshitter. Yeah, so we had to reschedule. So thanks for rescheduling.
Any chance to see Victor twice?
Really?
Twice in a week. So this week, we're at CSC's thanks to our partner, The Drum. We've got a couple of weeks left before the beautiful partnership potentially develops, or they ditch us completely. Who knows?
Yeah.
Thanks again for our 5-star reviews. I think we've had over 30 now on iTunes, so please, it makes a huge difference to us if we can just get a review and a rating. It helps us get up the charts, and it helps me cope with Al not having done his homework.
Last time I looked, we were still we were about number 9. You were noteworthy in business podcasting, which is fantastic. And you had some incredible stats back on the crime episode.
Yeah, the biggest episode smashed previous records. So.
What was it so far? We're at
just mega
30,000, something like that.
Yeah, I mean the Twitter followers have gone through the roof. I think we're on 215 followers. It's
on fire.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Absolutely on fire.
But if you do want to join in the Twitter hilariousness from Christina, it's at Innov Ramble. And yeah, that's it.
And for previous episodes, listens, show notes, you can get them all at www.theinnovationramble.com.
How's our analytics doing?
Not great.
Not great?
No.
How many? What, like 3 views a week or something?
Okay. The jury's still out. Still waiting to get the data.
And how about our email address? We got that?
No, it's as it was.
I think you've had a terrible week. I think you need.
Really?
I think you need to come to Edinburgh for the weekend.
That's just what I need.
You just need to relax. Right, but this week we are talking about the innovation of learning.
We are.
We are taking on information and retaining information. Yeah. So I'm going to start with a brilliant story. This is the story of Clive Waring, who was an established musician, a composer, a pianist, and he came home to his wife and 2 kids with a headache, and the headache lasted for 2 or 3 days.
Ouch.
And by the time he came back out of that headache, he couldn't remember his daughter's names. And what had happened is that there's a very rare disease that will attack the brain, the part of the brain that creates new memories. So he couldn't remember anything from 20 years earlier, but he also couldn't form any new memory. He couldn't learn anything.
Okay.
So the longest period of consciousness he could remember was around 20 seconds, but it could be as short as 6. So when his wife makes him a coffee, he says, "This is the first cup of coffee I've ever had. This is the first room I've ever been in. This is the first conversation I've ever had." And so if he starts talking about something, he will forget about the sentence that he started 20 seconds ago. But yet, he can still play the piano beautifully.
Okay.
But he doesn't know what his kids' names are, but he knows he has them. So he can remember things a long time ago. And he has this sense that something's gone wrong in his brain.
Yeah.
But he can't remember anything. But here's the beautiful thing, right? He still knows that he loves his wife. And every time she leaves the room for more than 30 seconds, comes back in, he literally leaps out of his chair,
Yeah.
throws his arms around and goes, "Oh my God, it's just so fantastic to see you." As if he
Yeah.
hadn't seen her
Yeah,
in
yeah,
20 years.
Yeah.
And she loves it.
I'm sure she does.
It's
I'm sure
literally,
she does.
it is the most pure and honest and joyous expression of love that I think I've probably ever seen, like every time. But he's really confused, so you'll interview him and he'll say, "Can you remember what happened in your accident?" And he's like, "I don't know who you are. This is the first interview I've ever had. This is the first conversation I've had."
Yeah.
And you can see him getting confused and feeling a bit dark. And then she'll walk in the room and he's like, "Darling, I love you. It's fantastic to see you." So he lives entirely in the present.
Yeah. Interesting that he's still able to play the piano, so those kind of like muscle memories and maybe some of the neurons firing around, like physicality, are still there. He still remembers his wife, so the kind of really deep-seated stuff is still there, but it's just the shallow memories that are blown away.
Well, we'll touch on the science, the deep neurological science of memory, but memory is located in lots of different parts of the brain. You know, you have the hippocampus, where you have your kind of working recent memory, but then your brain will compartmentalize that memory, and the longer that memory goes back, you know, the more the neural pathways will be formed. So older, more entrenched memories he will have, like he can walk, he can talk, you know, he's still a functional human being, but actually just can't take on anything new. It goes into his working memory, his recent memory, but he can't then make that jump from there to making it a long-term memory for more than 30 seconds.
So yeah, not a great headache to have. He's left in a rather interesting spot.
Happy relationship though.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, there's pros and cons obviously for that.
Yeah, that's true. Don't mean to belittle it at all. But.
And his ability to only remember or to lose memories from the last 20 seconds is actually in line with a lot of where our adult short-term memory is going. It's reducing all the time. However, that hasn't always been the case. Our ability to remember, to learn facts, has gone through like phenomenal evolution, and really the history of learning is one that's focused around education and the passing on of information, and a lot of our information, the stuff that we learn, it came through stories, it came through verse, through poems. We would sing to each other before we had writing, and so that was how information was passed down. So fables, tales, stories were kind of sung and spoken and played out to each other, and that's how we educated ourselves.
Well, you wanted to wrap one episode of the Innovation Ramble.
I still want to wrap an episode. It might be a short one.
Maybe we can start with singing, do a ballad.
We should just be moving straight in.
Right, okay.
And so the history of learning is really one that's focused around the invention of writing, because we had to memorize stuff before writing came along, and the cuneiform is arguably the oldest written form of communication and therefore education. And cuneiforms are they're effectively hieroglyphs. They were around before the Egyptian hieroglyphs.
So it's a written thing.
Yeah, a cuneiform it means wedge. And it's a kind of wedge icon that you would use a stick and carve into clay. So you think of Egyptian hieroglyphs. They're coloured and they're a bit more formed and a bit more cultured and cultivated than these ones. So this is just a kind of wedge little picture diagram, a bit like an emoji that was carved into wet clay. They've been around since about 3,400 BC, earlier than the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and cuneiforms contained several forms of writing. So they included syllables, they included alphabetic scripts, but also logosyllabic stuff like emojis. So that was the earliest kind of form of writing, and started to convey stories in that way. Fast forward to 500 years BC, and Confucius, who was fascinated in learning, he was arguably the first to think about differentiated instruction, so different styles of learning for different students based on their ability. Modern languages starting to really drive forward education and learning. English was discovered as a language in a small village in England, written on the back of a brooch that dates back to the mid 7th century.
What?
That was where the earliest example of English was found.
English was discovered in England?
In a small village in England, on the back of a brooch.
What was it
in the
doing
7th
there?
century. I don't know.
What
Somebody's
did it say?
name or
This is a brooch or something.
Don't know. Turn me over. Spanish was a bit younger. Earliest forms found in brief notes scrawled in the margins of an 11th century monastic text. And in 1999, a chap called Shigata Kurita, I'm sure I've got that wrong, an employee working at a Japanese mobile service provider, he invented the first emojis. And now we've got apps and emojis are everywhere. I think what's really interesting is, you know, it's been 5,500 years since those cuneiforms, which were effectively little emojis. We've now come full circle. We've gone through written characters to convey individual meaning, and we're now coming back to kind of mini stories and syllables told in little graphics.
And you think people are learning now through emojis, is that?
Well, certainly information is being conveyed, and so why not? Recently, I think Chrysler put out one of their quarterly reports with just emojis.
Well, I think that emojis is to language what smartwatches are to smartphones. They're like an addendum, an add-on. I mean, you realistically, are you going to go into a school and like, today we're going to learn about Confucius and then have like lots of picture of emojis? I think that's nonsense.
But you know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and so actually the ability to convey information, it's the same way that we used to do dance and poetry and jesters and bards. They would tell a story without any words at all spoken.
Well, if we look at it from a scientific level, I think actually you probably could learn via emojis. So my GCSE neuroscience section shows up every week. Basically, a lovely analogy for how the brain works is it's like a forest, right? And you're in the middle of the forest, and there's like a mountain, there's a river, and there's like, I don't know, like a little house, and you know where the mountain is, so you walk to the mountain, then you walk to the house, and then you walk to the river, and what you do is you there's like a beaten track, literally, and that's the way that the brain works. So if you want to remember a certain thing, like the location of something, how to spell something, what someone's name is, the way around a, I don't know, shopping centre, whatever it is, the more times you do it, the more beaten that track becomes. So when you learn a bit of new information, you create a neural pathway, and the more times you recall that information, the stronger that neural pathway is. Yeah. But here's a really interesting thing, is that neural pathways actually require water to form. So if you're dehydrated, your capacity to form new neural pathways is greatly diminished.
Makes sense.
Similarly with oxygen as well. So, you know, they say you've got to stand up, you know, even like the Apple Watch tells me to stand up every hour. It's quite irritating. But if your body isn't fully oxygenated, then your capacity to build neural pathways is diminished. So actually getting up and playing table tennis, as I do on a fairly regular basis, is good for your brain and memory.
Yeah. What about sleep?
Sleep, yeah, absolutely. So it's the classic stuff: sleep, diet, temperature. So your brain. Well, it's the interesting thing is that memory and learning is a physical thing. Yeah. Like when you learn something, you create a neural pathway, which is a physical part of your brain. When you learn something, your brain physically changes. So actually, you know, it's that classic expression: you need to protect the asset. So if you're tired, if you're dehydrated, if you've been sat in a chair all day, you know, classic student working through the night, drinking loads of coffee, hunched down in a chair, not getting any sleep is the worst way to learn anything.
Sure.
And we learn best when we're happy and relaxed. So when you're stressed, your brain pumps adrenaline and cortisol around the body, which triggers that kind of fight or flight reflex. So if you really want to learn, you do want to be calm, you do want to be rested, which is pretty much kind of what our teachers and parents told us, and we kind of probably ignored for about 18 years. But crucially, your brain learns very differently to a computer. So when a computer learns something or retains information, it kind of stores it physically and just takes up more space, where the way that the brain works is it connects neural pathways between different learning. So if you smell some coffee, then your brain starts to think about, you know, a cup, or that kind of hit of like adrenaline that you're going to get, you know, the smell, the taste, maybe a biscuit, sugar, milk, you know, just one thing, coffee, your brain starts firing off all these associations. And that's what we do as our brains, we start to form links between things. It's actually very different to the way that a computer work. But then there's kind of theories about how we learn, and there's an interesting theory of constructivism, which is all about schemas. So, you know, when you learn to walk up some stairs, for example, right? It was quite difficult the first few times, but eventually you got it, and you now have a schema in your head about stairs. So when you see another flight of stairs, you're not flummoxed again. You can just go up it. So you can apply the same schema of stairs to all kinds of different things. And so that's the way that people think that kids learn. They learn to do one thing, like, I don't know, move their arm around, and then that's a schema, so they can add it to the other arm, and then they can pick something up. And once they have the schema of picking one thing up, they can pick another thing up, and then a more complex thing. And so the idea is that kids create more complex schemas and build on top of all those things, to the point at which that they start creating schemas based on other people's behaviour. So there's the famous Bobo doll experiment. The Bobo doll is one of those kind of dolls with a heavy weight at the bottom that's just full of air that just rocks back and forward. And so kids observed an adult just like whacking the crap out of this Bobo doll with a stick, and then they videoed the kids in the room with those dolls, and the kids were like getting out hammers and guns and beating this thing up. So it's a learned behaviour. So kids will take on adults' schemas and create their own. That concludes the Tom's GCSE
renamed
neuroscience section.
So you talked about the difference between human brains and computer brains.
Yeah.
Obviously lots of debate there, lots of discussion at the moment about artificial intelligence, about the singularity, about the ability for robots to learn and then obviously and create parts and replace themselves with newer and better machines. One of the tests that's been used, probably the premier test in the last 65 years, has been the Turing test to test machine intelligence, not necessarily learning but intelligence. But it is moving into the learning space.
Can you give us a quick Turing test recap?
Sure. So Alan Turing, famous mathematician and computer science advocate. The test has been around for decades, and it's used to test whether a particular piece of software can imitate being a human. And so I could write a program and it could be submitted into a Turing test competition, and it needed to fool a percentage, I think like a third or 2/3, a percentage of the judges need to think that it's a real person for it to pass the Turing test.
Okay.
It's never been passed before. No one's ever written a program that can communicate and learn, and during that communication from the responses that we give to it, no one's ever made one that could fool enough judges to pass the Turing test. However, that changed in June 2014. A program called Eugene Goostman, like a 13-year-old boy, it convinced enough judges to that it was a human. And as big a moment as Deep Blue beating Kasparov in that chess game, and so the thing that's important from a learning point of view is that then we're now thinking about what is the Turing test 2. If we beat that, then what's number 2? And AI experts met in Austin, Texas earlier this year, 2015, to devise a new way of thinking about machine intelligence and machine learning. And some of the comprehension tests, you're going to love this, the suggestion that these comprehension tests and the learning tests that new programs and robots are going to have to go through will include assembling flat pack furniture. So putting a bit of IKEA furniture together could be the future test of learning and comprehension.
So they should get together with that DARPA challenge, shouldn't they? Instead of those robots trying to climb over like rough terrain, they could build furniture.
You're talking about the robotic dogs? Yeah, sure.
So the thing that I found was quite fascinating was Cambridge University. So Fumia Leader has built this robot that can create its own offspring. So it's a kind of like a weird claw arm, and what it can create is small mini robots based on its own design to complete certain tasks. And then if these small robots don't complete certain tasks, it learns that those robots aren't fit for purpose and just gets rid of them. So it's like the origin of the species for robots.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking mega simple here, but if you extrapolate that out,
absolutely,
you go, instead of us trying to solve an engineering problem, a robot will go, right, okay, how do I build a bridge over this? We just let it get on with it, and because there's no man hours associated with that, it doesn't matter how long it takes to solve that problem. So the singularity potentially got a bit of a boost forward, but it's quite exciting.
Ray Kurzweil will be very happy.
So staying with machines and machines learning, artificial intelligence, there's an innovation called adaptive learning. So Christina found some of this from McGraw-Hill, but actually it's also used in some Nordic countries. Is that we all learn in different ways. Some of us are kinesthetic through touch, some of us are visual, some of us are like oral, but also there's obviously a combination of all those things. People like working together, some people like working on their own.
Yeah.
So these what teachers are doing are creating different types of lesson plans that are called a playlist. So a student will arrive and their playlist will include all those different factors, working on their own, as a group, research, so on and so forth. And then at the end of the day, the data is captured about how well that kid performed, and then the artificial intelligence, the algorithm, will create the next day's playlist based on how it did.
It's absolutely fascinating because you've got both the advance of human learning, because you've got more tailored plans for students, but you've also got the machine learning that comes alongside that. So the algorithms are learning in order that they're providing a better service. So you've got a little bit of kind of singularity and artificial intelligence going, but also tapping into what Confucius found, thousands of years ago, that you need tailored programs for people. So machines and humans kind of learning together, and it really feels to me like that's the space we're in that now. We're using those smarts at the same time, and both of those kind of armies of individuals are getting smarter and smarter by the day.
But I love that kind of slight anxiety, and you still be like, oh, that could go horribly wrong.
It's the Larry Page quote for me, uncomfortably excited. It's exactly where I am with it. Something that's getting me, that is more on the excitement than the uncomfort, is BrainNet, and the ability for us to start to hook together real life organic brains in order to create thinking and learning that is greater than the sum of its parts. And there's a couple of examples here. One is animal brains from rats networked together into a functional organic computer that could do basic computational tasks, and actually do it better than an individual rat. But the one that, that is a little bit scary, that we're starting to use animals mechanistically like computer chips.
It's the poor rats. They had a couple of weeks off, didn't they?
That's one of the things. Some of the key trends. We're our baselines. There's rats. We're waiting for the third one to come along. But the one that's really fascinating is scientists put brain connectors into 3 rhesus monkeys in order to record their brain activity. Yeah, rhesus monkeys, in order to record their brain activity, not rats this time. And then they were able to, they taught these 3 monkeys to control a virtual 3D arm in space. But the monkeys were given control in only 2 dimensions each for the arm. And what scientists found is that working together, even though they had control of 2 planes, the 3 monkeys' brains work together to control the arm in 3D and actually get it to catch the ball and grab the ball with ease. And the thing that's...
So how does this work? So they've got like a wire coming out of their heads?
They've got wires coming out of their heads,
and there's an arm.
They're sat round a computer. I've seen the video. They're sat round a computer.
Are they rewarding them with bananas or something? Or like, how do they get it to
not sure
pay
about the reward. But it's set up somehow, and they're grabbing this ball. And if one of them slacks off, then actually the other 2 are able to kind of pick up the load and still grab the ball, even if one of them isn't concentrating.
Can't they get the arm to whack the other monkey?
Maybe grab a banana.
I can't believe that sounds so unbelievable.
And I think in both the rats and the monkeys, the thing that's fascinating is you're getting a better brain processing than just ×3, because there's efficiencies there.
So it's like cloud computing for organic brains. So if those, if you needed to solve a complex problem, you could plug in hundreds of people's brains to come up with
exactly.
This is how we're going to fight off the singularity.
It's like, well, we're probably going to get closer to it. It's like you took everybody connected on social media on Facebook, and rather than just having them connected virtually like that, their computing power was organically connected. You imagine the power and the range of a brain net of that size.
I'm starting to imagine I don't know, Google controlling all of that. So you've got all these brains connected. Who's the puppet master? Talking about retention. We had an argument the other night, didn't we? Well, not an argument.
We had a heated discussion about plasticity, neuroplasticity,
and multitasking. So
makes our life sound so interesting. Yes.
GCSE, neuroplasticity.
Yeah. Well, I've long been a fan of the concepts touted by Dr. Susan Greenfield, who's a leading
You're a big fan.
I'm a big fan of the concepts there. I mean, I guess I'm interested, or I'm open to the idea that we can learn to multitask. However, I know that she gets a bit of a bad press.
What does she say? What's her opinion?
Well, her opinion, and she cited a Kaiser Foundation study that showed over a 10-year period, 8 to 18-year-olds were almost doubling the amount of information they were consuming at the same time. The conclusion that she drew from that was that they were multitasking more. They were actually multitasking rather than task switching, was what we do. Her point was that my twin daughters, who are now 7 months, because they're going to grow up in a world with multiple channels all firing at the same time, that their brains are rewiring and will actually be able to cope with multiple channels, and they'll actually be able to multitask. You and I are too long in the tooth and won't be able to, but that's her opinion. But I appreciate that she gets some bad press.
Well, it's interesting because obviously I have my GCSE in neuroscience, so I'm allowed to talk about this with great detail. But what I found after this debate we had was that Stanford did this research, and they found that heavy multitaskers produced a worse result than people doing a single thing at once.
Yep.
Because it's about filtering information, and sure, your daughters will be out there, be used to a lot more streams of information, but they still have to form neural pathways. So if you're focusing on learning one thing at once, then those neural pathways will be stronger because you will be treading that path more often. Whereas if you're doing 10 at once, your brain's capacity to do it, I think, will be limited. So University of London found that people doing multitask exercises, the IQ went down, similar to levels as if they'd smoked marijuana or they stayed up all night. And the IQ drops 15 points for multitasking in men down to scores of an average 8-year-old.
Yeah, but in women it only drops 5 points, which is why the average is 10, and that's fascinating. We kind of knew that women were better at multitasking than men, and there's proof.
So basically, don't be an 8-year-old and don't stay up all night smoking spliffs and not getting any sleep is the thing.
I'd be interested to know the age of those people they were testing, because if you're talking about teenagers and older, then we are a phenomenal species. We're not the strongest, the fastest, the quickest, we never have been. We're the ones who are able to adapt to change, and I just fundamentally believe that anybody who says our brains aren't capable of doing a particular task is kind of, that could be a limiting belief, because we're pretty special.
Yeah, I think that's true, but the one that really cuts through for me is Russ Poltrak, neuroscientist at Stanford. He says that they did a study where students were studying, taking on new information. Some had the TV on, some didn't. And what happened is the ones that had the TV on stored information in an area of the brain called the stratium, which is about storing new procedures and skills, but not facts and ideas. Whereas the ones that weren't distracted by the TV, that information went straight into the hippocampus, which is that short-term memory area that was then put in different parts of the brain for better recall. So yeah, I'm sure that the brain will change, but the hippocampus has been part of our brain for a long time. So I'm starting to feel a little bit out of my depth of the level of neuroscience I'm talking here, but I think that's a fascinating debate. But one thing, okay, we might change in the future, but multitasking produces adrenaline and cortisol. And there's actually a feedback loop of dopamine. When you change task, your brain goes, "Ooh, we're hooked to novelty." Like in our office, Skype's a huge part of our culture. Obviously, a social media agency, so there's like however many different channels firing off, and I try to kind of close down as much as I can. And there's one study that shows if you've got an icon on, your InMail, and you can see that you've got a new email, your IQ drops by 10 points. Not opening it, but just knowing it's there. So you need to go into your settings and turn off all your little...
that off. I've been campaigning for ages to get email turned off between 10 and 12 and 2 and 4 agencies.
How's that going?
It's impossible. But it's because of the dopamine. We should be batching stuff up. That's how computers work fast, because they're able to batch stuff. And it's something that we're rubbish at work. We get excited by things arriving. We feel good because we've sent a message. But actually emails other people's problems, and they distract from the task at hand. So talking about reducing attention spans and multitasking, and I've read the other day that human attention span now has dropped below that of a goldfish. I know you're not sure about it, but a study by Microsoft. Apparently, we were at a 12-second attention span in 2000. It's now dropped to 8 seconds, a second below that of a goldfish.
Does that make any sense? So you can't watch a film that's more than 7 seconds long without getting distracted.
I think we're
nonsense.
talking about the difference between you're focused on one task and it going into the hippocampus and multitasking.
Don't try and win me over when you're saying
and your chap at the start, Mr. Waring, at the start of the episode, he talked about his ability to only remember the last 20 seconds. Well, there's a thing called attribute amnesia that is when, if I was to show you a picture and ask you to remember a particular part of that picture and then ask you to recall it, you probably get it right. But if I then ask you a surprise question about something around the periphery, most people only are able to recall that information 25% of the time. When you re-ask the question and then kind of know it's coming, then that's up to 65 to 90% of the time. But attribute amnesia is where you recall and regurgitate something, but then less than a second later, it's gone. And so I think with Google and the amount of information at our fingertips, we are over-reliant now on just passing through this information, not actually returning it. And it's something that books and coming back to the written word as a key part of education and learning, something that books, it's hoped, will be able to sort out. And I saw two really good examples recently brought to me by Will Marriott from Partners Agency, and they were the London Tube Book Club, where you can put a sticker on a book that you finished and leave it on the tube for someone else to pick up to try and encourage reading, and a brilliant campaign in Brazil where people could pick up a book for free, and it had effectively a metro ticket inside the back page, so you could scan, and that would get, so basically encouraging people to read by giving them free metro tickets in an attempt to kind of, I guess, get people to concentrate on the story.
Did that work?
I don't know.
It's a brilliant idea, though. Yeah. And I guess what was to stop people just beeping in and then putting their headphones on? But yes, that's a lovely idea. But in terms of learning and retention, actually, there's science that could actually kind of mess with all that kind of stuff. So, as I said before, like, memory is a physical thing. You know, when you create a memory, your brain physically changes. And in the journal Nature, there's this idea that you could reverse emotional associations by using light. The poor rats a few weeks ago around, the addiction episode, using optogenetics to change drug memories. So basically, a memory or something you've learned is in a physical part of the brain. So theoretically, if you can change that physical part of your brain, you can affect the memory. And Christina posed the question I thought was brilliant. If you were given a pill to forget a bad memory, would you take it?
Good question. That is a very good question. Using the same technology, I read just yesterday that scientists are, as well as able to remove memories, effectively go and implant them, create them, or reactivate them if they've been lost by making those neural network connections. Something they were able to reproduce in rats. So our ability to, through optogenetics, to change, enhance, increase, basically take control of memory and therefore learning. I mean, you could walk in the same way that you could take a pill to forget a memory. Potentially, you could walk into a store and take a pill to learn GCSE neuroscience or other skills,
or to remember something. Like take me back to the entirety of the summer of 1994.
There we go.
That'd be amazing.
There we go.
So my prediction, for the week is previous episodes. We've realised that at a deep fundamental DNA level, certain things are fixed, like how happy we are, how fearful we are, how hungry we get when we die, but our capacity to learn is plastic. The more you learn, the more your capacity to learn increases. And so I think that there's lots of innovative teaching techniques out there, whether it's helping kids to teach themselves, or all the different kind of techniques that we've talked about today, and which is external. But then we've also seen a lot of innovation around the stuff that you've just been talking about, actually messing with the brain to implant memory, to remove memory, and change the way we learn. So I think it's been a unique topic in the sense that there's an internal and external suite of innovations that could help learning change.
Unquestionably, there's more opportunities out there and more techniques. The rather sad and prediction that I have is that we seem incapable of using those for adults, where all of our focus is on the learning for children, Montessori and other considered. And broader churches of learning are helping our kids learn individually. They're having tailored programs. We're not streaming them as much in certain areas, certain countries in Europe. Denmark, I think, they're not streamed until they're 10 years old because kids develop at different stages. So we're giving our kids every opportunity to learn brilliantly. But then once we become adults, we're reliant on Google, on technology. We're not learning as much. We're managing too many tasks in the same day. And that's my concern, that we're not using these tools for ourselves as adults. The sixth mass extinction is on the way. Apparently, we're killing animals at 144 times the base rate, and it doesn't feel like we're learning as adults and taking advantage of these new techniques, which feels like a real shame. And it feels like if we don't, the end could be accelerated, which is a depressing way to finish.
They're doing a podcast on learning would create so much anxiety between us about the future of the planet. But I'm going to bring it back for my quote for the week. Albert Einstein, probably more famous for his quotes than his work, I think, at this point. But he said, "Any fool can know. The point is to understand."
It is all about understanding. And I'm going to finish with a quote from Terence Deacon. He's author of a book which I'm sure you've read as part of your neuroscience GCSE, The Symbolic Species, the Co-Evolution of Language and the Brain. And Terence said, knowing how something has originated is often the best clue to how it works.
Wow, nice.
Getting back to the source.
Quick shout out, thanks to Lucky Elephant for music, Matt Kempton for a logo.
Yeah, James Harrison for his photos as always, to Circe's Longest Champagne Bar, to the Eurostar for the tickets that I'm sure are in the post.
Yeah, Sam Scott and the drum for our support, Christina,
of course, thank you. Christina Lai, thank you.
We will see you next week on the subject of comedy.
We're making it much lighter than the end of the planet. We're going to be lots of laughs.
So I'll see you at King's Cross at 6:30 for our Renegade trip to the Edinburgh Festival.
Renegade trip. I guess this won't come out for a few days, so no one's going to find out.
Cool. All right. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.